Detect, Protect, Respond. This is Tom Bechtold, Director of Web Marketing Programs here at SecureWorld. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll be taking your questions throughout the course of today's program. Our speakers will try to answer as many questions as possible between presentations and at the end of the broadcast. Please feel free to ask questions using the chat function. Please type your question in the provided area in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You may need to click on the double arrows to open this function. If you're on Twitter, we hope you will join the conversation at hashtag SWWEBCON, hashtag SWWebcon. Today's broadcast will also be available on demand on the SecureWorld Web Conference website. 24 hours after the web conference, you will receive an email containing proof of attendance for today's program, which can be submitted for 1.5 CPE credit hours in accordance with various certifying bodies. We would like to thank our sponsor, Fishnet Security, for helping to make today's web conference possible. Today's moderator is David Matthews. David has facilitated 3 regional cyber event exercises. He is also the founder of the Cyber Incident Response Coalition and Analysis Sharing Group. In addition to holding CISSP and CISM certifications, he is a digital recovery forensics specialist and cybersecurity forensic analyst. Welcome, David, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you much. It's good to be here. It's good to have everybody with us. We have a good panel today, and this is an interesting subject, an important subject. I think there's not probably any organization out there that shouldn't be thinking about how they respond in today's world in the threat landscape that we all are a part of. I know everybody in the audience, and of course our 2 panelists, will agree that the threat landscape is evolving, always getting more and more difficult and more sophisticated. And to address that in a good way, to respond effectively, really takes planning and collaboration and capabilities and skills building, lots of things that we're going to talk about today. So we have a privilege from hearing from 2 industry experts today. Colby Clark, who is the Director of Incident Management for Fishnet Security. Colby and I have worked together in the past. A good guy, very smart guy. And John Chesson, who's a special agent with the FBI, also a very good, well-known industry expert. Colby Clark, I'll just get him started right away, and he can talk a little bit. And then, as we said, we'll be answering questions as we go along. We have some questions that were sent in earlier that we'll try to address as we go. And then, of course, we will answer your questions that you put up in the chat screen as well. Colby is a senior professional in the information security, computer forensics, and regulatory compliance fields. He's got over 15 years of experience. He's a leader in the security community. He's developed methodologies that really help stay ahead of the evolving threats. And he works with top security vendors to create and enhance tool sets to enable identification, investigation, and remediation efforts. Colby, it's all yours.
You mentioned that a lot of change in the security community, and the thing that we typically see out there, we see a lot of things that are constantly evolving and changing as time goes on. And so what we continually have to do is to adapt and change with it, and that includes using best-of-breed tool sets in order to be able to accomplish what it is we need to do. Some things that we'll want to cover today. I want to talk about problems we face. This includes, the targets and victims of attacks, motivations behind such attacks, as well as key concepts for being able to combat the types of threats that we're facing today, and how we're successfully able to overcome the challenges that we see
I think at this point what we should go ahead and do is let's go ahead and move to John Chesson's presentation, and then we'll pick up Colby's presentation immediately following that. Sorry for the difficulty and inconvenience for everyone here today, but we'll go ahead and get started here with John here momentarily. Dave, if you could pick up for John's intro, that would be perfect.
Sure, glad to do that. And sorry, folks, for the technical difficulties. We all love computers, don't we? So everybody's hearing me fine, I assume. So John is, again, another one of the experts that we all look up to here in the field. Really appreciate him being able to work with us today. And just to give you a quick bio from John. John is a 24-year veteran and special agent with the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. He has over 16 years of experience and is specialized in training in cybercrimes, computer intrusion investigations, critical infrastructure protection, and public-private partnership in information sharing. So, John, you ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So my goal in this presentation this morning is to try to give you an idea of what it's like for the FBI to respond to a computer intrusion event. We've gone under many iterations of how to deal with this problem over the years, and the FBI basically separates computer intrusion. Well, there is a cyber division, and that's the seal that you see. I figured that was more interesting than the FBI seal that everyone can see. It's a brand new seal. But we divide it up basically into criminal computer intrusions, where the motivation is usually money, and into nation state or intelligence organization intrusion activity. If you can go to the next slide, please. So for years since I've been doing this, we've always kind of classified the adversary as either being very much a novice or a script kiddie, not really understanding the tools that they're using, but they may be testing out tools, and there's a lot of free tools out there. And usually you can tell usually early on in an investigation whether they're knowledgeable or not. So we'll tag them as script kiddies. The other groups that we are a little bit more concerned about it would be the hacktivist type of groups, and these are a bunch of people that are kind of getting together and deciding to use these tools that they may have to attack a company or the government or an agency because they don't like the way things are occurring. Historically, some of these groups, like Anonymous, back a couple years ago, they were hitting the media a lot. Historically, groups like that picked on, website defacement type of activities, and we try to, when we were working the Anonymous group, we were basically trying to disrupt those activities and try to identify who's behind sending denial service or doing web page defacements. The organized crime groups have gotten a lot more sophisticated over time, and of course that's where the money is now. Why rob a bank when you can steal it without anyone ever knowing it's missing, using all these freely available tools that they have out there. And then, of course, nation states are I'm getting some feedback. Anyone else hearing that? I think somebody has to go on mute. Okay, so yeah, I'm still getting some feedback. Okay, so back on track. So those are basically how we categorize an intruder that's trying to break into a network, and that kind of dictates what kind of resources we're going to have to actually use to investigate in these groups. The top three, the script kiddies, the hackers, use in organized crime groups. Typically, if they're U.S.-based, we're going to use the criminal system, subpoenas and court orders and the criminal courts of the Department of Justice to gather the information we need to pursue these investigations. And then on the national security side, we'll use the FISA court order type of stuff that allows us to go after the foreign adversaries because they're not part of the criminal court system. Go to the next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about a progression of the attack because it helps you to understand how you want to build your defenses and how you're going to know that you're under some sort of cyber attack. So typically, if someone's going to attack you and your company, they're going to do research, whatever open source research they can, to try to gather as much intelligence about the company, and they're going to look at individuals in your company and their profiles, let's say on LinkedIn or their resume out on the internet, and they're going to try to assess that person that they may try to exploit to get inside your system. If they're, once they've identified a target, then the reconnaissance phase kicks in. There's many ways that they're going to do this. They can do proxy reconnaissance. There's a lot of websites and tools out there that allow someone else to scan your network, and they just gather that information and use that to figure out how they're going to attack you. Or they may use hire botnets and that kind of stuff, and they're going to do reconnaissance using multiple botnets to decide how they're going to attack you. Or they'll just simply do a low and slow. And usually the less sophisticated attacks are just, or they don't care, they're just going to be very noisy, and you may see that as noise on the perimeter of your network. Then they're going to try to grab a foothold in the network, use it exploiting whatever they were able to discover during the reconnaissance phase. A lot of tools are doing this in an automated fashion, so once they find the exploit, they're going to execute it right away. And then, of course, once they get in, they're going to keep the access and try to hide in systems like printers and things that you wouldn't think that you had to kind of keep up. One of my early intrusion cases, especially with the advanced persistent threat case, we went out to this company, and typically the way we get that information from past investigations, we'll get information about a specific victim and how they were exfiltrated, and it could be administrative passwords and accounts that have been compromised. And we'll take that information, we'll usually notify the victim company and present that information to them. And let's say this happened back in, I don't know, this mid-2000 time frame. And when we get, and we're basically expecting the company to gather the evidence and provide it back to us. We'll do analysis on it. We'll go back to them and try to tell them how the attack occurred. Let's go on to the next slide, because I want to illustrate a little bit on what we're thinking as far as an intrusion. Now, when I kind of came up with this slide to try to simplify what an attack looks like. The colors I picked based on how we classify information in the government, like a green network is basically your unclassified network. That's where you're touching the internet. The red network is really where we work and live and do all of our where your user's going to work and live. And then the yellow network is typically where you have your most sensitive information that you want to protect. Usually when a company discovers that they've been hacked, they're finding out about it once it hits the yellow network, and that's usually when the FBI is finding out about it too. So if we're coming to you with information to show that you had an intrusion occurred, it's usually when information's already left your network. The reconnaissance phase, it's probably going to be your earliest detection, but there's so much activity that's occurring. A lot of companies don't have the ability to determine what's hostile and what's not, what's getting through and what's not. So cooperation, correlation of multiple attacks and cooperation in sharing information is going to be the best remedy to thwarting those type of attacks. I know a lot of companies don't segregate their networks like I have on this picture, but it's good to think about protecting your network in this manner. In the government, we air gap these type of networks, so there's not going to be any automated crossover. Doesn't mean information doesn't cross over into those networks, but typically we try to air gap that so that it's a little bit more difficult. In a normal user's network, there's information flowing back and forth through all these layers. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I like to classify attacks into either an opportunistic attack or a targeted attack. So first I'll kind of talk about the targeted attack. I'm sorry, the opportunistic attack. Typically, companies are going to, educate their users to not open, emails from unknown users and that kind of stuff. There are mass email campaigns, and they're just looking for that one person to exploit within your network that has some level of access. And the email campaigns have been very popular. Recently, we have seen a lot of watering hole type of attacks where the attackers will try to exploit a website where they're after, let's say, iPhone developers, and they'll attack a site where they're sharing code and that kind of stuff. And they'll try to what they're trying to do is everyone that's coming to that site, they're trying to execute code of the visitor on the visitor's machine so that they can actually get into that system. There's a widespread one that I was involved in helping investigate about 1.5 years ago. We're seeing more and more of this stuff popping up. Then, of course, there's the theft of downloads. You got to be careful if you're going where you're downloading your tools from, or just updating Java, or what have you, where you're looking for tools. You're going to have to vet those tools and the sites that you're downloading them from. And then, of course, there's the self-propagating worms, mobile hotspot attacks, removable media, and then one of the things that we're most concerned about is we're seeing an increased number of attacks on supply chain type companies that may not have a robust security, but they're a supplier of one piece of equipment that goes into multiple user networks, and then the malware potentially could be implanted during the manufacturing of whatever that product is.
John, this is David real quick.
Yes.
I wanted to get back to the email phishing. I just wanted to let you, or tell you some statistics that we've seen over the years, is that about 10 to 20%, even with all the campaigns that go on teaching awareness on phishing, almost every single time we either did a test or followed up on a phishing campaign, about 10 to 20% of users will click on a link and get jump in. So when you see a mass phishing email with 10,000 emails, you can figure about 10% of those at least are going to result in some kind of compromise. There's also been a question raised, and this kind of goes to your supply chain point. with people hiding things in systems like printers. Could you talk a little more about how that's possible and how you classify that risk level? And is there a way to, are there tools out there that give you a way to monitor for that and to prevent that?
Yeah, so we've conducted a few investigations, and most of my latter years' experience, the last 3 years or so, have been advanced persistent threats. So those guys are usually finding the most crafty ways to kind of bury themselves in the network. And we had a company that was compromised. They were actually in a position to basically refresh their whole network, and they thought they were pretty safe. And then a few months later, we were getting other indications that they were still having information exfiltrated out of their network. We were, through investigation, we were able to capture some of that. And we went back to them, and we found out that they refreshed all their laptops and their user equipment, but no one even thought about the printers. Printers have firmware on it. They're networked in today, and it's usually the last place anyone thinks. They just plug the printer in and they never update it. Tools to find that, I mean, you're going to have to, I guess, have I think a process in place to look at your printers or watch your printer activity and make sure it's not scanning the network looking for other connections. I don't think a lot of people have IDS inside their network or have the manpower or resources actually to scan for that. So there's probably some automated tools that are being developed, but I'm probably not the best one to describe those. I'm usually talking to people after the system has been broken into.
Yeah, unfortunately, perhaps Colby would be a good one for that. He's still having technical difficulties. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I would say a vendor that deals with that is probably going to have better answers because they're providing the solutions.
Yeah.
To that.
Well, thank you.
Sure. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. So so this is typically what we're seeing. We're seeing targeted attacks. And again, I'm thinking probably more advanced persistent threat actors. Are typically looking to target someone. They're not always. I mean, they will take advantage of some opportunistic compromises to maybe further mask their true origins. But typically, they don't like to do that. They like to target. They like to know that their infrastructure is secure, so they're going to do targeted attacks on individuals. These guys are going to have the skill sets actually to really do low and slow attacks. They will actually craft ways to bypass the IDS system just to fool it, to think it's allowable traffic. Once they get through that perimeter, they'll set up a secure connection going out of your network, and it's going to look like any other SSL connection. Or they may use normally ports that you would allow out of your network, encrypt within that port, port 80 or what have you, and then set up their outbound connection that way. When they're doing network perimeter bypass, that's when they have a successful email surfing campaign email phishing campaign targeted at specific individuals. They like to go after your technical people, your security personnel within your organization if they can identify those people, or people that they just think have a higher level of access and may switch over to an administrative user on that network. Their whole goal is to get to an administrator level on a network as quickly as possible. There's some companies that, or actually a lot of companies are using wireless within their network perimeter, and they're treating it as if it's part of the inside secure part of their network I usually like to tell them that they need to treat it as much as a hostile part of their network is the internet, coming directly from the internet. There's too many ways to thwart wireless, and it's kind of insecure because not just because the encryption tools that you have, but it's broadcasting it outside your facilities. There's things you can do to reduce your risk with that, but when we respond to companies, we usually tell them that it's probably not a good idea to do your most highly valuable processing using wireless networks, and maybe just use it for internal communications. They're always going after VPN credentials to steal, because if they can come in as a legitimate user, it's not going to raise any flags. So people who want to travel are at great risk because they're going to try to VPN from a hotel or Starbucks or the airport. People are looking to steal those credentials and impersonate that user to get inside the network. And then, of course, when you add, devices walking into your network, people that are most vulnerable and probably have the guard down the most when they're traveling or when they're working from home. If I'm a targeted attacker and I pick someone in that organization that I want to try to exploit, I may go after them at home. I'm not going to go after them in their business where I may be detected. Even I have IDS at home, but do I look at the logs all the time? Of course not. I'm relaxing at home. So people have their guard down at home, so it's just important to remember that.
John,
and then of course, yes, sir.
Sorry, another real quick thing when you're talking about
Sure.
that is the without causing a diplomatic problem, can you talk a little bit more about travel and travel to different countries and how, and not necessarily specific countries, but there are different risk levels depending on where you're traveling, both physically and in the cyber world.
Sure.
And maybe just expound on that a little bit, since we have some extra time here.
Yeah. So travel. In fact, we usually advise people, especially your executives, that are traveling overseas into certain countries, some of which you wouldn't think there would be an intel service that's targeting you as a U.S. citizen, but maybe as a corporation or your competitors. There are intel operations all over the world. We usually tell executives that if they're going to travel, they should travel with a travel laptop. Only take the information they need for that specific trip, and a travel cell phone, because it's not just the moving through the airport. Like if you have your phone on and you have, most people do, so they'll turn their phone on as soon as they get off the airport. It's very easy to intercept, or to set yourself up as a cell tower in close proximity if you're targeting somebody, that even if they're making a phone call, they can intercept that phone call. During your travel times, you're most vulnerable for that, because they're setting up at airports and trying to capture as much as they possibly can. So it's just not a good idea to travel with a lot of information that is sensitive to your company, and you have to go through extra measures to try to protect that. We also ask, if they're going to travel, too, is they like image the system before you leave on a trip, and then compare it to the image when it gets back to see, what's been potentially picked up and brought back to your company.
We had our local cyber task force here in the Seattle area actually help us with that at one point, where we had a employee traveling to his home country, and which was one of those countries we know is likely a likely scenario, and so we did that image beforehand. Then we also put a little telltale in the drive space in case the drive was removed. and when it came back, it had been removed, and the local FBI task force, cyber task force, was willing to do some analysis on it for us. So I don't know if that's always the case, but one of the messages I think here is and especially that you can emphasize perhaps, is that the law enforcement community, FBI and your local law enforcement, Secret Service, they are very eager to participate and work with you, and so we can maybe talk more about that too at some point, about how to do that and what that is. So I imagine you're getting there eventually. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Can you go to the next slide, please? So these are the things we worry about, I guess, or of issue for us when we're conducting investigations. So typically I'll get a lead from another field office during an investigation maybe they were conducting, and I have to go out and tell a company that they've been hacked. The first thing I have to deal with is I have to assess the company. Okay, what kind of incident response capabilities does this company have? What that informs me is, am I going to get any information back from them? How much help are they going to need? And because of our limited resources and ability, to help these companies, them having a good incident response team is going to mean a lot on whether I'm going to actually be able to do the attribution investigation I need to do to figure out who's behind it and whether we can get our hands on them. So I expect companies really to be able to have logging turned on. I've been to plenty that don't. That they can do at least the first part of the evidence collection, collect the logs that are relevant, do some level of triage analysis so that they know that there is, what the problem, or at least be able to define the problem in their network, the intrusion problem. When they're collecting, if they're collecting some level of evidence, there's usually a natural response to want to unplug the system. We lose a lot of valuable information if they don't collect the volatile logs before they do that. So that's one thing we try to educate companies on, collecting that information, because once you pull the plug, it's gone. We still have issues with the increasing volume of digital evidence. We're constantly upgrading our systems to handle more, and every time we do, the data use on these systems just keeps growing exponentially. And it's important, to understand too that the legal process is not moving nearly as fast as our ability to collect this information. So as much as a company can do before law enforcement actually gets there, probably the more complete information they can get on their own as a victim by contacting our ISP and gathering information than it takes for us to actually go get the court orders to get that to request that information through our legal process. And if it goes overseas, then it stops, it slows down even more. A legal process, if I'm going to go through the criminal side to request something from a foreign government, we have what they call an MLAT process that we go through. Typically, all the administration to get that process requests and the host country law enforcement agency to respond usually takes months, maybe 6 months. And then of course what we're trying to do, what we do as law enforcement is, can we get reliable attribution? Can we figure out who's sitting behind that computer, not just what IP address they came off of, or what country they're sitting in. Go to the next slide, please.
While you're going there, John, real quick, A question did come up. What's the policy regarding company-sensitive information? So when you folks do go in as law enforcement, is there policies or is there something that you give as far as assurance to the organization that their sensitive information will be protected, not copied, or whatever?
Yeah, so as a law enforcement action, we are first, for us to like take control of, let's say, a hard drive where we're going to do analysis on, we do have to get a consent form signed by the victim company to take possession of that hard drive. If there's company sensitive information on that hard drive, we ask that the company identify that for us, and we will put it in the proper container to safeguard that from any disclosures if we go to the criminal process. If it's on the national security side, there's not a lot to worry about because it's going to be covered by national security. It's not part of the investigation. It's not going to be revealed in any way. When you're dealing with the criminal process, once you get to the courts and you have to release that information to the defense, if there's proprietary information in that, we usually get put that information in a container that the defense is not going to have access to just through the discovery process. So there's really not much to worry about there as a victim of an intrusion. Okay, so attribution. Usually this is a flowing diagram, but I'm going to try to do it without it. This is a problem, where the attacker is really never the last hop off, point from where the attack, or to the victim. The victims are only going to see the last IP address, maybe where an attack is launched. If you take the purple route, say the attacker comes in and he bounces through several systems before he launches his attack. He may come back at a later date and take a completely different path. Now, where we end up doing our investigations, if we're able to correlate data over many investigations, a lot of times we can see that there's a common hop-off point where we can focus our investigations, usually another victim, and we'll go to them and try to either get their cooperation to do a consent to monitor that intruder activity, or to do an analysis of their system to see if we can pick up any information about where they're actually coming from. So this is generally our challenge as law enforcement. What we're trying to do is attribute the attack to a person or a group. Typically, industry is not as much worried about it, but they may want to know where it's coming from and why, so that they can better protect their systems. It could be, I pick these country flags as possible countries that they could hop through. Doesn't mean they're coming from that country. But these are countries, I pick those countries because typically those are countries we don't have MLAT agreements with, so even to do a criminal investigation, if we made a request through official channels, we're typically not going to get a response. Sometimes we will, but typically we're not. So that makes our attribution challenge a little bit more difficult. Next slide, please. So for initial incident response, the recommendations that we typically make, the FBI, is to have the victim company do log analysis to verify there's an intrusion event before they're calling us. We don't have the resources to respond to suspected events. We need the company to have to do some level of analysis themselves to determine what the event is, and to have those logs ready for us in some summary write-up of what that event is also very helpful. Just reiterating, collecting the RAM, don't unplug the system. It's a natural natural for people to want to do that, and typically they go ahead and do it anyway, and we've lost a lot of good information. You're also, it's not just us as an investigation that you're losing information, but yourself fully understanding the scope of the attacker is important to you, because you have to know how badly your system was infiltrated. And if you unplug the victim system right away, you're not necessarily going to be able to tell what other systems have been affected. Again, we've been back to several companies over and over again where they had initial infection, they thought they cleaned it up, and then the infection is still there, or some remnants of it. A lot of times we're not getting information even to know if it's when those initial infections have occurred, because the logs don't exist anymore. So conducting triage analysis, keeping notes of your steps to investigate the intrusion event is important, both to explain to us and for your mitigation steps. And in collecting the digital evidence, a lot of times we're at this stage, it's happening so often that we really expect the company to be able to do a basic image of their own system. If they can do it while it's live, that's great. A lot of times companies are giving me a hard drive of the intrusion or intruded victim system, or sometimes we will give them drives if they're a small enough company and they don't have drives on hand. And then when they've collected all the information, that's the time to contact law enforcement. So a lot of times when we go out there, there's companies that don't really have a full developed plan, or they haven't practiced the plan that they have developed, or they use some generic plan that may be not appropriate for their company. NIST just came out with a cyber framework. It'll help you kind of piece together for your particular industry what elements that, based on your industry function and what you're trying to do, or what your industry does. The NIST framework is kind of a good place to start to help you figure out what things that you need to do to help protect your network. And I attached the PDF to that. So key points to remember when you're developing that plan. Senior management has to be on board. I've been to a number of companies where we did the victim notifies. Senior management just didn't get it. The company, I've heard comments like, well, our company doesn't make anything sensitive, and we're open, our processes are open to the internet. Yes, we do have contracts as a supplier to government, organizations. Sometimes they're attacking you not just for what you do in your company, but they're just using you to exploit your relationships with those maybe government contractors, or just to infiltrate the supply chain, depending on what you're producing. There's been companies, very big companies, that we've dealt with where we knew there was an intrusion, or that they were being targeted for intrusion, and we would ask them questions like, well, okay, where's your intellectual property? How does it traverse your network? A lot of companies just don't know. They don't really have a good handle on where their information is going to. I think if you have a plan on how information is distributed through your company, and you get a handle on your intellectual property, that's got to be a first part of developing your plan. Otherwise, you don't know what to protect and where to put the resources. Very common thing that when we go out to a company too, and I have a little story connected with out-of-band communication. One of my advanced persistent threat investigations, one of the early ones back in the it was like 2009 time frame. I went out to this company. I told them, okay, here's all your admin passwords. They pretty much have your entire network. Here's all your sign-ons and logins and your passwords that this group was using. I need these hard drives collected, and we'll do some analysis. So the system administrator, which was also the security administrator, took my information, contacted his team. It was a distributed network through with several home offices spread throughout the country. He collected the hard drives. They're all sent to him. He called me back. I get the hard drives from him. I remember this. It was July 1st because it was right before the 4th of July. And I collected the when I first contacted him, it was July 1st, and I got the hard drives right before the 4th. So we did an analysis on the hard drives. I'm sorry, I got the hard drives after the 4th, a few weeks later. So I sent the analysis to our lab. Back in those days, it took 3 to 4 months before we actually got an analysis report back. But I got the analysis report back, and I'm reading through the analysis report, and I'm seeing that the malware that was known to be on the network, the intruder started changing or trying to cover up his tracks of the malware and his traversing the network on July 1st of 2009. I'm like, wow, that's the day that I showed up. I'm trying to figure out, well, how did they know to clean up the date I'm showing up? What we came to find out is the system administrator immediately sent an email out to the rest of his group and was making calls through their voice over IP system. They were the attackers were so infiltrated in the network that they were actually watching emails, looking for keywords, and listening or capturing VoIP calls and looking again for keywords. So it's really important to have some sort of out-of-band communication, maybe cell phone use for your security team to respond. That's what we learned from that. It's important for companies to have notification banners if you do decide to cooperate with us and allow us to watch an intruder in your network, and it happens to be a portion of the network where other users are coming in. There has to be a consent language for in the warning banner of accessing that system. A lot of clear defense contractors have already learned that lesson. They're already using these warning banners whenever you're entering the system, that it will be monitored and information can be shared with law enforcement if appropriate. That language has to be in there. There's a couple examples out there on the internet that you can use. I think SANS.org has a good example of that. And that's important for us to take to the next investigative step. A lot of companies out there don't necessarily have the resource to have skilled people on staff. If they do, they should constantly get them training. Webinars like this are great. But a lot of times you're probably going to have a contractor that's educated in dealing with this stuff on a regular basis to deal with collecting the evidence and helping you do some analysis and processing it. And of course, it's always good to stay involved with your local FBI or law enforcement. FBI in particular has several programs where you can get involved in. InfraGard is one where it's focused on infrastructure protection, but it allows pretty much anyone who's a U.S. citizen and has some alliance with the critical infrastructure to become a member.
John, just real quick, we do have Colby is back. We want to give him some time here, so I want to get to that soon. Also, just to let people know, in the Northwest region here, we do have the Cyber Incident Response Coalition, which is a public-private sector nonprofits, academics, and et cetera, that has been meeting for a while now and is trying to put together an information sharing and analysis sharing group as well. So just I'll let you go ahead and finish up, and then we'll get Colby back on.
Okay.
Thanks.
Go ahead to the next slide. Don't worry, all this is on FBI.gov. If you want to go to the site, all these ways of contacting the FBI. I'll just highlight a few things. We do separate internet fraud from a computer intrusion investigation, so IC3.gov is the best place to go to make an internet fraud type of complaint. You can call your local FBI office. It should be in your phone book, or you can go to FBI.gov and find contact information there. If you are interested in joining InfraGard, there's a Become a Member link on that InfraGard.org's website. Go to the next slide, please. So what the FBI can do, a lot of people, well, why am I going to call the FBI in? Well, if you are looking for a prosecution in the person that broke into your company, then we're a natural organization to call. We do have global resources that we can tap into. We do have technical expertise, and we do have a long-term commitment to solve this problem. We have local regional computer forensics laboratories where we can process information quickly. We're also rolling out to the public a malware analysis system where you can submit malware to the system called BAX. Right now, I think we're only opening up through the InfraGard portal, but I think we're going to open up a little bit broader pretty soon. Probably the most important thing that the FBI can bring to this is actually correlating attacks amongst similar victims. We learn a lot, and we're trying to do a better job of sharing that information back with the community to help better protect themselves. So as part of your good citizen duty to help others from being victimized, it's important to share information. And FBI has a mechanism for intaking that information and distributing to those who need. We work with DHS as well to help to distribute that information as well. And then the FBI is the only law enforcement agency with the mission of having also a national security function. So we do integrate with the intelligence community. So if your intrusion initially we might think is a criminally motivated intrusion, and through analysis find out it's actually part of a nation-state intrusion, we have the mechanism for drawing that information out and getting it into the intelligence community to better protect the U.S. infrastructure. Next slide, please. So when you're attacked, basically follow your plan. If you don't have a plan, you better create a plan. Preserve the evidence. Do the triage analysis. If you don't have forensics expertise on hand, then have a contractor on speed dial and do some level of analysis yourself, or have your contractor help you with that. Go to the next slide, please. So things that we're looking for you to document: incident timeline, what systems have been affected, what their purpose is, how they're configured to some degree, whether there's a Windows or a Linux OS that's running, and then, again, whatever intellectual property may be stored on it. It may give us an idea what also who attribute against if they're looking for specific information. Please turn on your logs. More logging is better for us, even though it requires to go through some analysis, but not having it at all a lot of times will leave big gaps in the investigation. And if you have people that are doing some diagnostics and analysis for you, we want to know what what they're thinking. If we take the case to court, we find it's a criminal adversary, and we're going to go after it criminally. We do need to know how much money was spent, time and resources in fixing the issue, and some estimated losses. Dollar amounts sell with juries when we're going criminally, so I think statute-wise it's a minimum of $5,000, but I don't think I've ever come across any incident that cost less than $5,000. So that's a pretty easy bar to hit. Next slide, please. Here's some sites to maintain awareness. Secret Service has the Electronic Crime Task Force. DHS has the National Terrorism Advisory System. US CERT, if you're getting more on the geek side, you probably want to get the US CERT alerts. Drill down. There's information sharing analysis centers out there for industry specific. So if you belong in a specific industry, you want to look to see if that information analysis center is appropriate for you. Some of them are free, some of them are fee-based. It really depends on which one. These are organizations that actually work with DHS and the FBI. Next slide, please. So on a personal level, don't be patient zero in your network. There's some basic things you can do. Everyone is a little bit lazy with this that I run into, where you surf the internet as administrator on your account. A lot of the modern operating systems, you don't have to do that anymore. You used to have to log out as a user and log back in as administrator if you wanted to run code. Now you just switch to the user account just for downloading and executing the code. That will keep you safe a lot if you don't operate as an administrator. And then you can do more things like locking down your browser with disabling scripts. That's a little bit of pain, and you can get tricked into running something, but at least you'll be a little bit more aware. Still do virus scanning, even though that it's not going to catch everything. And then be very careful when you're using untrusted wireless networks. We're starting to see more and more people go to hotspot areas and try to get people to download software updates from a non-registered site through them to plant malware on your laptop or a smartphone or what have you. And social media habits, just be careful what you put out there about yourself. People are going to use that to social engineer someone you know. And we already mentioned international travel. Just be careful when you're traveling. And that's all I have. So I'll hand it off to Kobe. Feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions, either by phone or email is fine. Email is probably preferred, though.
Thank you, John. That was very informative. Really appreciate your time. We do want to get right to Colby here and give him a chance to go through his slides a little bit. Just real quickly, one of the things that I think John touched on a little bit that I really want to emphasize is how important it is to practice. And one of the things the new organization I'm working with now, Michael Hamilton and Associates, really emphasizes when we go into an organization is what is your plan? Do you have a plan? Have you exercised the plan? And do your people, what are your capabilities? What are the people? And I think, as John mentioned, that's one of the first things they have to find out. One of the things he talked about real quickly was the triage part of it, and I think a big part of that is understanding exactly what the risk to your organization is. So that's another piece, what assets have been affected, what access do they have to sensitive data or IP, intellectual property. That's a kind of a first thing you need to be able to understand and be able to see. So as John mentioned, a lot of these things are best done ahead of time and worked on ahead of time, practiced, and I just can't emphasize that enough. I'm a real big believer in exercises, and so let's give Colby a chance to get through his slides. And Colby, you ready to go?
I am, yes. Apologize again for the technical difficulties. The technical difficulty gremlins like to wait for webinars, I'm pretty convinced. It's kind of like how trailer parks attract tornadoes. I think they're one of the same thing. So starting back up right where we left off, I want to talk about the problems that we see a lot of all around the country. We do hundreds of investigations each year, and we see very, very common themes all over the place. So I want to talk about some of these and what we're doing to mitigate the effects of them. So quite typically, we'll see waves of malware attacks that are attacking various industries or environments. So you'll see companies that have similar payments systems or sales servers and things like that. They will, as vulnerabilities are identified, the bad guys will just basically go around and take advantage of these systems one after the other. They'll basically rinse and repeat with minor variations. And a lot of reuse code. So it helps us be able to identify that when they're using the same tactics, but it just shows how much understanding they have of the various environments out there and how quickly they're able to move through them. And in the process of this, we'll see thousands or even tens of thousands of machines affected within a matter of hours. We had one a couple weeks ago where there was 30,000 machines affected within about an hour-and-a-half time frame. It just blew up in their environment, and malware was pervasive everywhere. Some of the things that lead to difficulties in responding or even being able to identify attacks are the sort of proliferation of broadband connections leading to large numbers of ingress-egress points, also a lot of unmanaged devices. You'll see situations where companies that grow through merger and acquisition, for instance, they'll have some of the largest problems because they won't have a good handle on what's coming and going from the various networks they have, nor what machines even exist. It's, things are a surprise to them. And then what happens is badness festers and spreads throughout the environment. And maybe environments that were previously clean become totally compromised. And leading to the blindness that we see a lot of is polymorphism of malware, wherein it's polymorphic per machine, and even on each machine it'll sort of pick up, change itself around, and plot back down and look completely different. And so it makes it such that it avoids detection by common methodologies that are used, such as IPS and antivirus, things like that. There's been some interesting studies done where they're showing that antivirus is somewhere between 3 and 5% effective these days, which is pretty much as close to completely useless as you can get without being completely and totally useless. So significant problems. And what we're seeing a lot of are these layers, sort of multi-vector malware that comes in layers. And you'll see almost like a conventional warfare campaign where there's kind of a shock and awe, distraction type of phase that comes in and hits lots of machines. Maybe it corrupts a lot of files on network shares and plants a lot of malicious files that look like benign files or files that are interesting, that people want to look at, and so they click on these files, and it affects their machines, and it spreads to other machines. And this is really, really visible. Customers pick up on this, pretty quickly. A lot of folks are able to remediate, this first wave of it, and then after that's clean, they think they're done, but quite often they're not. A good example of this was W32 ChangeUp, which brought in Zeus, which often brings in CryptoLocker, which is really just a module of Zeus, and then you wind up with data loss or whatever. We're also seeing, particularly for fraudulent ACH transactions and financial fraud, you'll see where there's malware on the phone and malware on the computer that works in tandem and is able to compromise users' credentials and any kind of two-factor authentication like a PIN that's sent to a phone, and they work together in order to be able to perpetrate the financial fraud that we're seeing. And we've seen customers lose millions of dollars in a matter of minutes because of this. So what's it all do? So, I mean, what we typically see is a very long-term presence of malware and unauthorized access within within customer environments. We'll go in a lot of times because maybe they see one little piece of it, maybe they have an inkling, or maybe somebody else who got compromised, and so folks are worried, well, maybe they're compromised too, maybe they're at risk, and they want a warm fuzzy, they want to sense that they're not compromised. They want somebody to come in and validate it. And we'll come in and we'll find out, well, yeah, it's actually bad and it's worse than you thought, and in fact you've been compromised for 5 years and didn't know it. And here's these machines that are affected, and here's the data that's at risk. Quite often, what the bad guys are doing is they're basically putting in place the ability to have command and control to be able to, as part of reconnaissance for later activity, or just because they want to add you to their mall of badness, if you will. And if you take a couple steps back and you look at what are the bad guys trying to do? Well, if you think about it, they're trying to run a business. They're trying to run a successful business, and they are basically just looking to be able to populate their mall of badness with you. They want to have every company in America in this mall of badness, and what do they want to have? They just want to have access to your environment, and so that's and for whatever purpose, to whatever bidder wants to get access. Next slide, please.
So Colby, real quick, there was an audience question. They basically said it's a little scary to understand that the adversaries probably know more about your systems than you do. Would you care to comment on that?
You know, that's the running joke. It's because we go into environments all the time, and we'll ask the customer, we get a copy of a network diagram so we can get an idea of what your network looks like. And the typical answer is, oh, well, we had one of those like 2 years ago, but it's totally changed. And so our thought is, well, we should just ask the bad guys. They seem to have a pretty good one, because you'll see them move very, like they'll come into the corporate environment, for instance. They'll put a bunch of malware. They'll collect all this information. And within not too long of a period of time, they'll be able to move around like admins, and they often operate and can move and flow through quicker and more easily than the administrative staff. So they typically do have a better understanding. And once
we used to have a joke that they would patch things. We would allow them to keep our systems patched because they would keep them patched better than we would, up to date better. So, yeah,
I've seen that too. That too. We had a system where the bad guys had successfully defended a Windows NT4 system for about 5 years before, and because they were milking it because it had a PeopleSoft database on it. And they were milking it as like identity theft of all the employees and students at this university for about 5 years' time before finally somebody else came and knocked it over and used it for DDoS. So moving forward, now, as much badness as we see in the corporate environment, we're seeing a lot more of the same level of malware now in cardholder data environments. It used to be that, the corporate environments had more sophisticated malware, and then we saw a lot of legacy types of methods in cardholder data environments. And that's just not true anymore. We're seeing some very, very high-grade stuff in cardholder data environments, and you'll have maybe some box sitting off to the side, like a backup domain controller or something like that, and it will be basically the internal malware command and control, which will push out memory resident agents to various point-of-sale servers or other devices, and it's memory resident only. It'll push it out, let it run for a time, pull it back, push it out to some other place. We had a large grocery store chain that we did investigation on, and it was years before the card brands were able to detect this fraud, because they were able to just collect just a few cards from different places at random times, that it didn't trigger the alerting mechanisms that the brands had. And then when you look at the boxes, they look most of the time clean. There's just little fragments that you'll find in the page file if you know what you're looking for, and that's the only trace. So real sophisticated stuff. Also, the way that they're using credit cards to avoid detection is very sophisticated. Back in the day, they would collect thousands of credit card numbers or tens of thousands of credit card numbers, use them all at once so that they could use them while they're good. Nowadays, they're waiting a lot longer. They're waiting towards the end of the credit card's life, like towards maybe the last few months before the expiration of that card. and using it then. So it spaces out the ability to detect it, because it might be years before they actually use that card, which delays, the card branch from recognizing when, in fact, and where, in fact, it was stolen from. It makes it difficult to get a CPP or common point of purchase for the theft.
So Colby, have you seen in your investigations cardholder data like in test environments or QA environments, like in the mainframe environments like banks?
Yeah, we see a lot of credit card data and a lot of inappropriate places. One situation we had is there was a bank where a developer was just looking to do some testing, and they had some problems with the internal devices, and so they downloaded a dump of all these credit card numbers and customer information, Social Security stuff, and they uploaded it to a public-facing FTP server, such it was going to be easier to work with. In that way was the developer's logic. Well, it wound up getting indexed by Google, and it was very easy for everybody to work with that information for a short period of time. But yeah, we see a lot of abuse, mishandling, errors that result in a lot of difficulty and cost after the fact. Some other things that we see a lot of is security devices that basically aren't tuned. There's this tendency to just get the latest and greatest cool wow thing and just stick it out there, put it in the wire or install it on the endpoint and think it's going to solve the problem, but usually it doesn't. It's got to be tuned. It's something, you have to have a skilled operator who sets it up and watches it. You can't just put it on there and have it work. And there's a lot of times we'll go into environments where they really had the tools to be able to defend their environment and to do the investigation, but they just didn't have the program, behind it. So it's the skills or the staffing, whatever, to be able to successfully do it. So we'll go in and we'll use their tools in their environment to solve their problem. And then, when we're all done, we've kind of given them a roadmap for how they can do this themselves better. Now, moving forward, there's some things that we see a lot of that are preventing detections of malicious activity even further. One thing that we've seen is the decrease in the ability of network devices to be successful in detecting malicious activity. And it was really pretty easy. Once the bad guys started flipping the switch for SSL to encrypt all the activity, or they hack encrypt sites, then you have things where, let's say, malware devices that are basically looking for systems getting compromised, or malicious activity on the wire that they can see in an unencrypted way. They no longer are able to see that. And so we've seen an efficacy of network detections, maybe down to 10, 15%, if that, and it's probably a lot less than that. And combined with what's called the domain generation algorithm, abbreviated as DGA, wherein malware will spin up thousands of random domain names, and generally they'll route it through the Amazon EC2 cloud or something like that. And being as these names are just randomly spun up and that basically acts like a proxy for malicious activity, there's no reputation analysis that's going to be able to flag it. So between SSL and DGA, network devices are having a really hard time being able to detect the malicious activity. So some things that are really important is having something on the endpoint that's continuously monitoring, watching what's going on, looking for unauthorized changes, and really locking down the endpoint. Very important concepts. So overall, we see too much reliance on antiquated security solutions, and there's a ton of low-hanging fruit out there that gets exploited all the time. And most of the places we go to, they really lack the incident response program and training that is necessary. And quite frequently, when you go into environments and they say, "Oh yeah, we have an incident response plan," it's usually something like the plan says an event is detected, it's escalated to a level of an incident. Now these people are in charge. But it stops short of saying, well, okay, now what? What do you need to do? And so what we like to do is work with folks to develop scenario-based workflows, and that really helps a lot. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
It's on there. Go ahead, Colby. It's up.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm not seeing it. There we go. Okay, so I want to talk about the differences. Now, a lot of the problems stem from the differences that that exist from legacy threats to modern threats. Now, if you look back in 2001, the types of things that we're dealing with, just a little over a decade ago, that were common, you had a lot of script kiddies and a lot of kids playing Franks. They were just bored, smart kids out doing stupid stuff. And the types of spends and the types of technologies that people invested in, where they were barely adequate for the time, to be perfectly candid. Things like antivirus, firewall, VPN, and IDS, and they were kind of okay back then. But nowadays, now that you have, there's billions and trillions of dollars that's successfully been stolen from companies to be able to fund these very aggressive campaigns, and you have nation states who may or may not be motivated by money, or maybe it's just to get them ahead. Maybe they want to be the top country, and so they have very, very sophisticated programs. But if you take a look at the technologies and the methodologies that are implemented, it's the same type of thing. And it really wasn't adequate even over a decade ago, and we're still using the same things today. They're pretty hopeless in being able to defend against these current threats. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so there's we encourage people to think a little bit differently about how do we get how do you move the needle in security, really? Like what is the right posture? What attack or what stance do you need to take to be able to successfully defend your environment? And a lot of that depends the type of business that you're in and what you're trying to protect. But there's certainly a lot more that's required than we're seeing typically invested in today. Next slide, please. Well, I'm waiting for the next slide. There's a question about any suggestions about how to put together a good tabletop exercise. So I'll go ahead and answer that question. Now, some things that we've seen is, in order for tabletop exercises to be good and to be engaging, they need to be as real world as possible. Some things that we see a lot of, that where it doesn't go well is it's just too rote, you just click through it, and it's too, paint by the numbers. Some things that we try to encourage people to do is to get folks engaged. Like when we do tabletops, there's, we'll put people to work. There's examples. There's things that they have to decode. It's almost like a choose-your-own adventure novel. Flip and foot, and it's very engaging. Some things that are important too is expanding beyond just having the technical team to also being able to exercise, the larger team as a whole. Like, how is the whole company going to respond, to a breach? And so you need to have representative members, of various different groups within the company to be able to show how they can respond to the breaches. And that engagement includes legal, includes lots of different facets, of the organization.
One of the other ones is always the PIO, the public information, or the PR group. That's another one that we always try to engage as well. But
absolutely.
that's a really good point.
And a good one that we had recently, I was very impressed by, was there was a large power company that wanted to have a very aggressive, large tabletop exercise that included over 100 members of their company. And it started off with folks in tech support, customer service, who had some questions, or who encountered some questions, from customers and from people just having problems, internal and external. And then it got escalated, all the way up to the point of C-level, boardroom, public relations, the attorneys, and it turned out to be really good. Okay, so this slide, talking about problems we face. quite frequently, and I would say the norm is we see people trying to manage security through compliance. And I love this slide because it's, you'll see that there's there's an overlap between it that's significant, but obviously security sticks out on every side pretty much. It's much larger than compliance. And for the most part, if you're trying to be secure, you're going to be compliant with some exceptions from privacy weirdness, and a lot of that is foreign, particularly EU privacy weirdness. So we definitely encourage people to manage compliance through security, because you're going to have a much stronger posture if that is your goal. Next slide, please. And some other problems that we typically see is that people will focus or hyper-focus on one particular type of thing. They'll say, well, hey, what should we work on? We'll have good security on the network. Let's do that, or good security on the endpoint. Well, the problem with that kind of mentality is that hackers are like water in a bucket. If there's a hole in the bucket, that the water will always find it. The same is true for hackers. Because they'll compromise you in whatever way you're vulnerable, and so you have to focus on having really a holistic security program if you want to keep your data secure. And there's some things I'm going to go into in more detail about that later. Next slide, please. Now I want to talk about who are the targets and why. Well, to start off with, everybody's a target. I think that most people can see and appreciate that now, that there's nobody who is not a target. Because there's so many different things they can use you for. For one, you're just another logo in the mall of badness. They want to have them all. Collect the whole set. Be the first nation state to collect the whole set to populate their mall of badness. But more than that, they can, if there's IP, there's PII. Or maybe you make a great addition to the botnet. Or if nothing else, you'd be a good relay such that they can go through your organization to hack somebody else. Because anybody can look at the wall and say, oh wow, look, I have all this traffic from China and Iran, but we don't do any business there. Why are these people coming to our website? Clearly this is bad. But if it's just going through Joe's Pizza Shop or something, maybe it doesn't look so malicious. So there's lots of reasons. That and supply chain stuff. Now we see a lot of supply chain attacks. It can be hard to, for instance, sometimes take down the big business. So what they'll do is they'll go for the contractors that work with them. And Target's a great example of that. Or they'll go through you. You're part of the supply chain. You're an employee. It's likely you have some similar or shared passwords between the various different organizations, and if they can compromise you at home, they're more likely to be able to compromise you at work, something like that. So they'll target the employees as part of the supply chain. Next slide. So talking about victims now. Obviously, that's the victims. There are plenty, and I just have a very small amount to be able to fit on a slide. I can't talk about them all. So I'm going to talk about just a few of the high-level ones that have hit in the last few years, and we'll talk a little bit about what's happened as a result of that. So you see that there's all these up here. All these folks have been sued. But some lawsuits are worse. Now, clearly, class action suits are really bad, really hard to defend against, and the attorneys seem to have an unlimited amount of money, an unlimited amount of money to be able to attack you. But what's worse than that is even after you're done with the civil lawsuits, you can face, on the criminal side, you'll have multi-state DOJ groups who may go after you if they feel that your compliance posture was negligent, and that's happened quite a bit. You're also seeing that, and that's been going on for a long time with the FTC. And in fact, the FTC coming after you with the consent order, that's just about as bad as it gets. And no lie, you can seriously go out right now and kill somebody, go to jail for murder, and get out sooner than a company can be done with an FTC consent order. It literally is a 20-year life sentence, essentially, for your company that you will be beholden to the FTC, that biannually you will have to prove that you have a good security posture through independent outside review through the FTC for 20 years. It is nothing to be trifled with and very, very significant. The SEC has also gotten into the game recently. I don't have any examples listed in this presentation, but they have been going after doing the same kind of thing that the DOJs, the state DOJs, and the SEC have, but going after financial companies who have allowed data to be breached. So there is a lot of there's a lot to go through. Even after you have been breached, you have the reputation loss, you got through. Square with your customers, you recovered IP if possible, then you have to deal with various different layers of lawsuits. So it becomes very, very significant and painful financially for folks to deal with in many ways. Next slide, please. So what I want to go into is now is talking about the motivations behind attacks. Now, this slide, I got this from Hackmageddon. It's one of the engineers from Last Line. He makes some really good eye candy slides. So if you're ever looking for cool stuff, visuals, presentations, they got this, and I filter stuff off there all the time. But this slide I put up because I like to disagree with it. We see that there is not a true split between cybercrime and hacktivism most of the time. Now, sure, there's hacktivists who are purists, and they're out for what they feel is the good of humanity, and they feel, bold and noble like visual Robin Hoods running around in green tights in their grandma's basement. And I don't dispute for a moment that they do that. I think it's very likely, but oftentimes they're highly emotional and they are easily riled up. And it's easy to get them, spooled up to DDoS some company out there, and usually that kind of a DDoS activity is motivated by cybercrime. And John, perhaps you could back me up on this, but I saw a memo that went out from the FBI a while back that was warning banks that typically at least half the time or more when there's a DDoS against a bank, usually it's a smokescreen for worse activity. And we see that same thing, and beyond just banks, DDoS has become standard operating procedure for just being a smokescreen for trying to do data exfiltration or implanting malware or ACH transactions or anything. We see this a lot. So I would say that most of the hacktivism is motivated by cybercrime, but usually unknowingly. Next slide, please.
Colby, there was a question if you are aware of any information, and maybe John also, about risks or controls related specifically to ATMs.
Well, anybody can go to DEF CON any year, and there's generally some kind of a hacking class on ATMs. And so I've seen that for a long time. Some of the stuff I got to be careful what I say. Maybe John, is there some things that you would like to share?
No, I don't have anything specific on ATMs at this point that I can share.
There's a lot of micro skimming devices that have been evolving over time. We've seen some interesting stuff that's out there on the internet that's available. There's a lot of interesting technologies that could be adapted to ATMs. So yeah, definitely got to beware. And it's getting harder and harder to detect if there's malicious ATMs. Now, going back to motivations, there's basically a market, and if there's a market, there's going to be a supply. And so, for anything, you can basically put a dollar value on how much you get, for credit cards or access to a botnet or hacked webcams. I mean, which is a little bit unnerving to think that somebody could be paying for access to your webcam, but in fact it's true. For anything that you have on your computer, in general, there's some kind of a market for it, and there's a dollar amount that's associated with that. So there's a way for the bad guys to monetize all this stuff that they're getting in their mall of badness. Next slide, please. Now, if you take a look at CryptoLocker, it's, I like to describe it as a very successful startup business. Obviously, it's, and I'm kind of being tongue-in-cheek about this, but you know, they have been amazingly successful in their, you know, their couple years of business that they had. They, you know, pulled in excess of $30 million out, and that was, and this data is a little bit old. This, actually, another slide after this goes into a little bit more. But you know, you saw it beta tested originally on what we call Grandma's XP machine, but it certainly made its intrusion into the corporate environment now, and we're seeing really a ton of network drives being encrypted. You're seeing like law firms, as a good example, losing all their data. You know, their wealth of information, which is all their files, you know, become lost because, you know, for one, they didn't pay, or they stopped the encryption too early and couldn't pay, or, you know, there's a lot of reasons why the data gets lost, or they just wouldn't do it. And you're even seeing law enforcement companies pay up. There was a sheriff's office that paid up recently, which is interesting to see. It's clearly there's a lot that goes into this, and they've put a ton of thought into it, and they've developed really what is actually a viable business model, as bad as it is. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, it's you know, $30 million is what it grossed, I guess, as of, that was estimated anyways, as of December 2013, and that's probably based mostly on reporting. I would venture a guess that it's much larger than that, and probably a lot more successful than that. But the people ask all the time, well, if they're going to go through all of this hassle, you know, and why don't they just start a real company? Well, the reason is because it wouldn't make as much money. I mean, these guys, they're able to make a lot of quick, easy money by doing a lot of really bad, malicious things, totally unethical, completely immoral things. But nonetheless, if morals and ethics don't get in your way, then you know, and clearly these guys are that way. Then they're able to make a lot more money this way than starting what would be considered a you know, normal, healthy, full business. Next slide, please. What I'd like to get into now is talk about metrics, for instance. You know, a lot of people ask, well, you know, how can you help me make the business case that we need to, you know, be able to put a security program in place? Or what can you show that if we do this, it's going to save us, you know, a certain amount of money? And in the past, those things have been really, really hard to show. And these days, you know, I get asked this a lot less, but I still get asked it quite frequently. You know, interestingly, these days I see a lot more of, instead of having to convince the board or convince senior executives that security is important, you need money, you have the reverse where they're saying, hey, here's money, what's your plan? Which is good to be, but we run across a lot of folks still that we have to try to help them prove this. And so Ponemon put out a really good study, which is a 2013 cost of data breach study. And they were looking at breaches of 100,000 or less records was their sweet spot that they chose to measure. And they found that the average total cost of a breach was around 5 million and 5.4, and that the average per record cost averaged over the years that they analyzed it was about $192. That's per record breach. So if you had a 100,000 records, you know, breach, and you do the math. But the other side of it was that there was you know, there were things that made it per record cheaper. So for instance, if you had a strong security posture, it was $34 per record less. You had a good IR plan, $42 per record less. You had good leadership, and you hired consultants. You know, it lowered the cost of responding to a breach because, you know, you have the right technologies in place, and you're not just bumbling around. You know, you're able to effectively respond and to engage quickly, and to, you know, for one, not make mistakes, and two, be, you know, proficient, and three, you know, get it right, you know, the first time. You know, this happens a lot where we see people, maybe they try to fix it themselves first, and they don't necessarily have the ability to, and then after a couple of weeks of trying to deal with it, they'll call us up and say, hey, can you come help us? And we're always happy to help, but it can be difficult to sometimes help people after they've tried to help themselves, because they typically will step on a lot of evidence and it's just more difficult, or evidence has been lost. There's a lot of things that need to be done before a breach, during a breach, and as and after a breach to make sure that you have adequately preserved evidence and captured evidence such that we can tell the whole story and that we have the visibility we need to figure out exactly what's going on. Next slide, please. Now, there's a lot of statistics out there where you see that the hackers on average of around a year, somewhere between 240 days and a year, and the needle moves every time this metric comes out. But we've seen a lot of attacks where the bad guys were inside of an environment for 5 years plus. Not uncommon at all. It's super common. Now I mentioned earlier too that another important fact that AV is somewhere between 3 and 5% effective, and I want to go into that a little bit more detail. I would say that for the modern malware, the true modern randomly polymorphic malware, it is less effective than 3 to 5%. Where it gets the 3 to 5% and how it gets buffered up that way, it's because there's a lot of old modules, legacy, things that get pulled in that often get detected. Either that, or there's still Nimda and things like that, floating around the internet that it's able to find. And that, I would say, bolsters its numbers quite a bit. But as far as the new randomly polymorphic malware, I don't think it's going to detect almost any of it, because we go into organizations all the time where they're completely compromised and their AV is absolutely silent. I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to watch the C-SPAN video where you had Fran Roche from Symantec, and you had Target, and then you had Neiman Marcus representatives there, and they were testifying before Congress about the breaches that happened, and Symantec was brought in to be the security voice and to speak to Congress. And I thought it was interesting that Fran Roche said that signature-based antivirus detection is dead, basically. We all know this, but it's a big admission from an AV company that it's no longer an effective method of protecting computing environments. More is required, and so I applaud him for coming out and saying that. I thought that took a lot of courage to do that. Now, I've seen estimates that that have been published out there that the Pentagon supposedly estimated that in 2011, Chinese military spending equal about 180 billion of sustained investment in cyber warfare. That's a lot of money. And if you think about it, what can you not buy for 180 billion dollars? I mean, there's a lot of things for sale for 180 billion dollars. And particularly when the average wage in China is about $7 per week. How far does that 180 billion stretch? And if you take a look at some other statistics that we've seen, that, for instance, as of 2013 July, Chinese hackers had apparently cost the United States around $2 trillion. That's just Chinese hackers. So, let's say of that sustained military spending, 100% of the 180 billion, which isn't the case, they did other things too, was spent on cyber warfare. Well, they pulled out $2 trillion. So, I mean, even at that number, it was a substantial ROI. But that's just part of the equation. China isn't the only place of cyber threats. There's a lot more that goes on. You have Russia, you have the Middle East. There's all kinds of places that are after your IP. Next slide, please. Something I like to show is well, what's $1 trillion look like? And I love this slide. So this is $1 trillion, and basically they have pallets of $1 billion stacked up. I think it's too high. And that's what $1 billion or $1 trillion looks like. And if you figure, as of July 2013, they pulled 2 of those out of the United States. I mean, that will fund a pretty amazing amount of research and development into being able to attack just about any infrastructure that we have in the United States. So next slide. So moving past this. So how do we combat this? You have a monster, that is coming up after us, who is extremely well funded. So what can we do? Well, there's a lot of things that are within our control to be able to effectively be able to identify, contain, and remediate and fully investigate threats. And so try to split it up between corporate environments and cardholder data or any kind of static environment. So in corporate environments, it's incredibly important to understand what is happening in your environment. You really have to have very good visibility from the network level to logs to endpoints. You need to have a really clear picture and constant visibility and real-time monitoring, really at every level, to be able to do this. And you have to understand what is normal. And so behavioral analysis is really important in the concept of being able to identify least prevalence. Because if there's not a signature for the malware, and it doesn't just pop right to the top as being, hey, this is bad, this is Zeus, this is QuakeBot, this is whatever it is, then you have to look for, well, what is different? What is out of place? Like, why does this one machine, have this one application, or why does each one of these 10 machines have an application that doesn't exist anywhere within our environment? So those are really key concepts, and we'll use those in being able to investigate and identify malicious activities. And keep in mind that you want to be able to have an endpoint solution that's not limited to your security perimeter, because folks travel around all the time, and if it's become the norm. What is your security perimeter anyways? I imagine just like everybody else's perimeter, yours is kind of evaporated, particularly as folks have laptops and travel around the country doing business. It's also important to understand and be able to restrict applications to known good behavior. So, for instance, being able to limit the ability of where applications get updates from. Is it ever a good idea that Java should get an update other than from Oracle? I mean, should Java ever get an update from joespizzashop.ru? No. And of course, being able to scan for known IOCs is helpful. But having said that, indicators of compromise, it's changed so much that you can't always identify what's bad. So you have to be able to search for what's odd. And of course, the ability to reach out and be able to do enterprise forensics, hugely important. Now, switching over to the cardholder data environment side, or any kind of environment, and you could say SCADA environment, I think for that matter, where systems are fairly the same, they're not changing a lot. Locking things down through application whitelisting is incredibly important. And once again, restricting any kind of changes or out of norm behavior, because there's really no reason, for instance, for a point of sale terminal for someone to be out, doing things like checking Facebook, installing other applications, or doing anything other than what that point of sale was designed for, or that SCADA terminal. Next slide, please. So from the network monitoring and restriction point of view, having, just like on the endpoint, having the ability to do retrospection, where you can identify, maybe you don't know what that is right now, but let's say 2 weeks from now you identify, oh, here's a signature. Being able to look back in time on the endpoint, having that same ability on the network is also important. The concept of retrospection is hugely important, and also being able to do SSL decryption, because there's so much that goes over SSL these days. I mean, most sites, like everything on Google even, they're forcing everything through SSL. And the ability to decrypt that traffic and to analyze what is inside of it has become very important for many reasons, and most notably being able to detect. And the ability to identify domain generation algorithm usage is incredibly important, because anything that's spinning up thousands of random domain names probably isn't something desirable to have inside your organization and can really come to no good. Now, a couple of key concepts that we have used effectively for being able to basically stop the bleeding in just about every point of sale environment we've seen breached is two things. One, enable two-factor authentication for remote access. There's really no reason or justification to not have that, and applying that anywhere possible any kind of APT scenario, anything. I mean, if folks are communicating from the outside, they really ought to have two-factor, irrespective of whether it's card-void data environment or any environment. And that's going to stop a ton of your problems. And also proper egress filtering. Most environments that we see, in particular card-void data environments, you can go anywhere you want. You can check your Facebook, you can go Gmail, Hotmail, wherever you want. And it almost always leads to no good. It's generally how things get compromised and how data gets out. And so for card-void data environments or any type of restricted environment that doesn't need general access, like a corporate environment, we'll lock it down such that the host inside, the nodes inside, can only communicate with where they need to on the outside and nothing else. So like card-void data environments, they can only communicate with upstream card processing, and that's it. And so through using two-factor in that, and network egress restrictions, it'll stop at just about 100% of the time, at least from what I've seen. Now, next slide, and I want to talk about some other key concepts and moving beyond endpoints and networking, just talking about some other things in general. Now, for a long time, people have been wanting to protect their data. And so how do they protect their data? Well, in the past, they've built firewalls. And it really has not well-protected data. What happens typically is, data gets out. And so we like the idea of connecting DLP plus DRM. There's some good solutions for that. Because if you lock down your data, you lock down the endpoint, it's really hard for that data to get out. If it does get stolen, they've really not gotten anything useful. And as John mentioned, having a good security program, a good incident response program is absolutely key. And having that well practiced makes all the difference. We've seen a huge difference in a matter of weeks to months, how long it takes people to respond if they have a bad program versus a good program. Next slide. And training and testing is absolutely essential. A team that is not practiced, does not know their program, does not know their tools, simply will not be effective. You're just not well positioned to be able to handle a security incident effectively. It turns into a disaster. And so having good training and testing is absolutely vital. And we do a lot of this in helping folks be able to create the playbooks and practices. And also being your phone a friend, for incident response retainers. There's always a point where somebody hits a level where they just can't respond. Either it's too big or it's unknown. There's a problem. So always have a ability to call somebody in to assist you. Develop those relationships, and retainers are a good way to do that. And that's all I had.
Thanks, Colby. That was very, very good. Lots of great information. I'm going to run a couple of questions by you. I really want to thank all of our audience members. Sorry that this has gone longer than we expected, but we did have some technical difficulties getting started. And it was good information. We didn't want to cut anything off. So I really appreciate all of you who have hung in for the entire time and have given us some questions to answer. I will just throw out a couple of questions that we have listed both from before and during the conversation here. One of the things that I think is a very good question and is good for all of you for Colby and John perhaps to comment on, is that these kind of some of the tools and solutions that are out there to manage the type of or to combat the threats that are the current threat landscape can be very expensive and can be prohibitively expensive for small organizations, especially public sector, small public sector, or private sector even. The small mom and pop shops just simply would not have the capacity or resources. So given that, what would you say they should prioritize? So if you were going to say there was just like one or two things that a very small organization could do or should do that wouldn't cost very much money, that would be, we've already talked about some of these, is just having a plan and practicing the plan. I think that's my first thing. But what, Colby or John, what would be your suggestions?
Well, for a lot of the technologies, the pricing is sort of a scale, right?
And so if you're talking a small company that doesn't have a lot of money, it can be a lot more affordable to implement some kind of endpoint technology first, because those are priced out per node versus some of the network detections, which have dropped a lot in efficacy, it's priced out per box, right? So a box might cost the same for a small company versus a medium company, whereas endpoint technology, good endpoint technology, it scales upwards. And so it's, you're talking, on average, somewhere between $15 and $30 per node for decent endpoint protection.
Yeah, John, did you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I think Kobe handled it pretty good. Yeah, there's solutions that can scale for you. There's a lot of free stuff out there too that you can implement, but you're going to need a little bit of expertise. So if you wanted to put your resources in something, it's find somebody that's knowledgeable enough to utilize some of the free stuff that's out there. And some of it's pretty good, but it takes a level of knowledge. If you can get a contractor in there, probably could set you up pretty good and teach you how to manage it, or you might want to outsource the management of some of the security monitoring. But it's important to watch your networks regardless of what size you are, and collect the logging so at least you have something to respond to.
Yeah, and I know with Michael Hamilton and Associates, where I work now, we use a lot of open source tools. A lot of those, as you said, that requires some technical expertise and a lot of care and feeding. They are open source and they're inexpensive or free, but they're free for a reason. And they can be very useful, but they do need, but I think one of the slides early on was having security tools they're only useful if you have someone who's maintaining them, somebody who's administering them, and monitoring them and tuning them. And especially with open source, you really have to spend a lot of time and energy and technical know-how. Have to have a lot of technical know-how in some cases to tune them, to make them valuable. But that's a very good possibility for people with the smaller resources. Another question that came. Go ahead.
I want to add just one more thing. There's also a lot people can do with stuff they already have in place. Like there's a lot of things you can do with Active Directory to lock down environments that is fairly esoteric that people just don't know about. Microsoft has a lot of interesting and powerful features baked into a lot of their products that nobody uses. It's like they're secrets, but they're not. They're just things that folks don't understand. And so I would encourage people to kind of get some training on what they can use better with what they already have. There's a lot that can be done.
Yeah, we aren't going to get into specific solutions here because we aren't selling anything, but we do. I think if you are interested in more specific ideas around these, you can send questions, and as Tom has mentioned on the chat, we will take those questions and we will respond as best as we can, and we might be able to give you some more specifics around that. Another question that came up was about honeypots as a method of detection. Have either of you, John or Colby, used those? Or are you familiar with those, or have you? Would you like to answer any of that or talk about that at all?
Yeah, I've managed them a lot in the past, mainly from a research and development perspective. I find that most people already have a honeypot, whether they know it or not, and so I don't think that most places have the ability to effectively manage a honeypot and to prevent it from becoming a problem. I think maybe the time is probably, the effort is probably best spent elsewhere, managing like a security device, monitoring what's actually running the environment, rather than trying to just do a honeypot. But we typically see, and during breach discoveries, that most organizations are compromised and have command and control and are unwitting members of a honeypot.
Yeah, we do use honeypots on occasions. The biggest problem we run into with single-purpose honeypots is you're putting a lot of resources and doing an analysis and watching a system that's not real. you as a small company may not be able to, you're better off just working on your protection of your system rather than running a honeypot. But I think they can be useful. Bigger organizations could probably use them, and if just merely someone connecting to a honeypot where they shouldn't, someone should not be connecting to that system at all, could be used as kind of a tripwire indicator that there's some activity that you should be aware of. Some of the honeypots that we use, we don't, we kind of lock them down, and we use them kind of as an indicator of bad stuff happening in a segment of the network, and maybe to further investigate that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think they are a tool that can be used. I think they just have to be monitored carefully so that they don't end up providing a launching pad for other attacks, or an avenue to get it, do further damage in your network.
Sure. Yeah, it's like any of those tools that we've talked about. It really depends, and is important to have good control and good technology and good skills, and good kind of ongoing maintenance and control over it. So I think we've gone well over time already, and this has been very, very useful. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed hearing the presentations from John and Colby, and your questions. We will, as we said, get back to you with answers, more specific answers to questions that were left over if we haven't already addressed them. And so, I think the takeaway for everybody here is have a plan, practice the plan, talk to people, look at, NIST is a good source, as we talked about. There are other sources out there that we could also refer you to. Talk to the experts, collaborate. I think that's a huge thing. Collaborate with your communities, collaborate with law enforcement, collaborate with the verticals and the horizontal, with your industry. Those can all be useful ways to get better at doing this and be more prepared. And exercise, exercise, exercise. That's the bottom line. So I really, again, just want to say thank you to Colby and to John, and to all of our audience, especially those who hung out to the very end here. And I'll turn it back over now to Tom. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot, David. SecureWorld would like to thank David Matthews for moderating today's broadcast. We'd also like to thank Colby and John for lending their expertise to our web conference program. Of course, we would like to thank our sponsor, FishNet Security, for helping make today's event possible. And again, thank you to the audience for working with us through the technical issue at the beginning and going over time with us. But I believe we had some really great educational content here today. And we hope you enjoyed today's program. And we hope to see you at future web conferences, such as the August 28th web conference on emerging threats, locking down the endpoints. Within 24 hours of this event, you will receive an email acknowledging your attendance that you may submit to your certifying body for 1.5 CPE credit hours. You may wish to verify the eligibility requirements with your certifying body. If you'd like to revisit this complimentary educational program or share it with a colleague, we will have an on-demand version available in the next few days. You will find a link on the SecureWorld web conference page that does have our slide deck for today's program. Be sure to visit SecureWorldExpo.com for the latest in security news and blogs from industry leaders. Again, thank you all for your time today. This does conclude today's program. Thank you.